The laughter outside was deafening. Glasses clinking, children singing happy birthday, voices rising in cheerful chaos. Every sound bled through the thin wooden door and pressed against my chest like a weight I could not lift. To anyone on the other side, it was the sound of love and celebration. To me, it was a cruel reminder that joy was happening just a few feet away, while I was trapped in a darkness no one dared to imagine. I could smell the sweet frosting of the chocolate cake, mixed with the aroma of roasted chicken and bread fresh from the oven. That same sweetness turned bitter in my mouth as his hand covered it, forcing me into silence. I remember staring at the ceiling, paint peeling in uneven patterns, and trying to count the cracks to distract myself from the pain. I was so small that my feet barely touched the floor from the edge of the bed, yet the weight pressing down on me made me feel centuries old. The music outside grew louder, people clapping in rhythm, and I wondered how no one heard my muffled cries. Or maybe they did. Maybe they chose not to listen. That possibility cut deeper than anything happening in that room. Every detail of that night is burned into my skin. The sticky feel of alcohol on his breath, the way the sheets smelled of dust and mold, a sharp contrast to the perfume of vanilla drifting in from the kitchen, the muffled sound of a child blowing out candles, while at the same moment, I wished for my own life to end. Children outside giggled about who would get the first slice of cake, while inside I was begging for mercy no one would give. It was as if the world had split in two. On one side, light and celebration. On the other, a private hell with no witnesses and no escape. What made it worse was how normal everything seemed once the door opened again. He would step out, wipe his hands, laugh with the guests, and sing louder than anyone else. No one questioned the red in my eyes or the stiffness in my body when I reappeared later. I carried the secret like a stone tied around my neck. They clapped for the birthday song while I could barely breathe. That duality haunted me every single day. How could life look so perfect on the outside, while inside it was nothing but ruin? The contrast between joy and torment became my prison. I learned to measure time not by clocks, but by the rise and fall of laughter outside the door. Every chuckle, every cheer, every cheerfully shouted toast meant another moment I was not free. To this day, when I hear people laugh too loudly, a part of me freezes. My body remembers what my mind wishes it could forget. The human body has a strange way of storing trauma. For me, it lives in my skin, in my lungs, in the way my heartbeat accelerates every time I hear the word party. I often wondered how many others around me suspected something, but chose silence because it was easier. Families in small towns are masters of pretending. Everyone likes to believe that what happens in a house stays inside those walls, but secrets have a way of staining everything they touch. Even as a child, I felt the hypocrisy of it all. People cheering in one room while a life was being destroyed in the next. It taught me something terrifying very early. Pain can exist right next to joy, and no one will ever notice if they do not want to. That night, as the voices outside counted together for the birthday song, I made my own count in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4. Not for candles, but for how many times he forced me into silence before he finally let me go. I remember pressing my nails into my own palm, trying to focus on the sting of my skin instead of the violation happening to my body. The marks stayed for days, a secret language I wrote on myself to remind me that I had survived, even when it did not feel like I had. What people do not understand is that trauma is not just about what happens in the moment. It is about the betrayal of normalcy. The sound of laughter, once innocent, became a trigger. The smell of birthday cake became poison. Even the simple act of clapping hands in celebration carried the echo of my silence. Those moments were stolen from me. I never got to associate them with joy. Instead, they became chains that followed me for decades. And yet, in the middle of that unbearable contrast, I remember something else. The way my heart kept beating no matter how much I wanted it to stop. The way my lungs fought for air, no matter how hard his hands pressed. Survival is sometimes the loudest rebellion. Even as I wished for the darkness to swallow me, My body refused to give up. It kept me alive for reasons I would only understand much later. For years, whenever I closed my eyes, I could still hear the laughter. It played like a broken record in the back of my mind, looping endlessly with the memory of his breath on my face. The two sounds fused into one, indistinguishable, until I could no longer separate happiness from horror, and that was his greatest victory. He did not just hurt me in that room. He rewired the way my mind processed the world. But here is the truth I need you to understand. That duality did not kill me. It could have, but it did not. The same sounds that once broke me eventually became the fuel that pushed me forward, because I knew that if I survived, one day I would reclaim them. I would hear laughter again, not as chains, but as freedom. And though I did not know it at the time, that night was the beginning of a journey that would take me from silence to voice, from hidden scars to an unshakable truth. My name is Ana Beatriz Fernandez, 72 years old now, living quietly in a small town where the streets still smell of fresh bread in the morning, and the neighbors wave as if nothing bad could ever happen behind closed doors. People here know me as the grandmother who sells cakes at the weekly fair. They see me smiling, carrying trays of cinnamon rolls and vanilla cupcakes, and they believe that is all I am. A sweet old lady, simple, harmless, full of kindness. They have no idea that every recipe I bake carries with it a memory of survival, that every grain of sugar hides a bitter taste of the life I once endured. At the fair, children run to me with coins clutched tightly in their little fists, begging for the biggest piece of chocolate cake. Their mothers smile, grateful for a moment of quiet as the kids devour the slices. To them, I'm a comforting figure, but inside me, the act of giving joy through food has always been a way to reclaim something that was stolen from me. For so long, birthdays and parties were a source of fear. I associate cakes not with celebration, but with nights of silence and pain. So today, every time I hand a child a piece of cake, it is as if I am rewriting that memory, taking back what was once poisoned and turning it into something pure again. I never planned to be a baker. Life chose that for me. When I was younger and trying to build a future out of broken pieces, cooking became my way of surviving. The smell of flour and sugar gave me something solid to hold on to. While others sought therapy or silence, I found comfort in the rhythm of mixing, kneading, waiting. Bread rises when you treat it with patience, and I wanted to believe that healing worked the same way. Maybe if I tended to my wounds the way I tended to dough with time and care, they too would grow into something better. Sometimes people ask me how I learned to bake so well. I usually laugh it off and say it is just practice, but the truth is far heavier. As a child, I was forced into silence so often that I turned to observation instead. I studied the way my mother kneaded bread, the way neighbors made pies for Sunday gatherings. While my body suffered behind closed doors, my eyes absorbed everything they could from the outside world. Later, when I finally had freedom, those observations became my tools. The very act of watching in silence, which once was a prison, turned into the skill that now feeds me. There is a strange irony in my life. I sell sweetness for a living, yet I was raised in bitterness. The world looks at me and sees a woman who must have lived a peaceful life to reach old age with such gentle hands. They do not see the nights those same hands trembled so badly that I could barely hold a spoon. They do not see how many times I wanted to end it all, to silence the pain forever. People often admire survivors without realizing that survival is not glamorous. It is messy, full of scars, full of nights where you cry until your chest aches, and mornings where you force yourself out of bed because giving up would mean letting them win. Even now, decades later, the shadows of my past walk beside me. They appear in the smallest moments. The sound of a door slamming still makes my heart race. A certain cologne in a crowded place can freeze me in my tracks. These are the invisible remains of what happened to me. And yet, instead of hiding from them, I have learned to live with them. My wrinkles are not just signs of age, they are proof of endurance. Each line etched into my face holds a story of survival, of nights when I thought I would never see the sunrise, and mornings when I surprised myself by being alive. Sometimes young women at the fair stop by my stall, not for the cakes, but to talk. They confide in me, often in whispers, about the struggles they are going through. An abusive partner, a suffocating home, a secret they cannot share with anyone else. I listen, I nod, and I remind them of something I had to teach myself the hard way. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to do with it. Those conversations remind me why I survived. It was not just for myself, but for all those who needed proof that broken lives can be rebuilt. People think resilience is about strength, about never falling. They are wrong. Resilience is about falling 1,000 times and still daring to get up one more time. It is about trembling hands that still keep baking. It is about a voice that shakes but still tells the truth. It is about the quiet decision made in the privacy of your own mind that you will not let the worst thing that ever happened to you become the definition of your existence. I often think back to the girl I once was, the one who sat silently while the world celebrated outside her door. If I could whisper in her ear, I would tell her that one day she would stand tall in the sunlight, flower on her hands, laughter around her that was not poisoned anymore. I would tell her that she would reclaim every birthday, every song, every cake, that the smell of sugar would not always be a trigger, that one day it would mean peace. And so I live quietly, but not silently. My story lingers in every corner of my life, but instead of breaking me, it has given me purpose. When people leave my stall at the fair with a slice of cake, they carry more than just sweetness. They carry a piece of my survival, a fragment of my voice, and the proof that even from the darkest places, something beautiful can still rise. When I think about my childhood, I remember a strange split between what I showed the world and what I carried inside. On the surface, I looked like any other little girl growing up in a quiet town. I played with neighbors, ran barefoot in the yard, and carried my school books pressed to my chest like they were treasures. But behind the walls of my home, life was different. My father was a man everyone respected. He walked through the streets with his head held high, shaking hands, nodding to friends, and being praised as a man of integrity. My mother was a teacher, strict and orderly, the kind of woman who always looked composed, with her hair pulled tight and her words measured carefully. To the world, they were the perfect couple, raising a well-behaved daughter. Inside the house, perfection was only a mask, and I was the one forced to carry the weight of their secrets. At first, I thought my father's attention was just the way fathers acted. He would ask me to sit close to him, to help him with chores, to stay nearby when guests were around. People would say how lucky I was to have a father so involved in my life. I even believed it for a while. I wanted to believe it because the alternative was too terrifying. But then the looks changed. His eyes lingered too long. His tone carried something I could not name, and the way he touched my shoulder made my stomach twist. It started with words that felt strange, compliments that sounded wrong when spoken to a child, little commands that carried weight I did not understand. My mother never interfered. She looked the other way, busying herself with chores, or simply lowering her gaze as if blindness could protect her. The night it began is etched in my memory with painful clarity. It was during a family celebration. The house was full of relatives and neighbors, the table heavy with food, and the air filled with laughter. Everyone was distracted, their faces lit with smiles, their voices echoing with songs. He called me into the kitchen, his voice sharp but disguised as casual. My heart sank immediately, though I did not know why. I followed him, clutching the small doll my mother had sewn for me, the only gift she had ever given with genuine tenderness. He pointed at the sink and told me to clean dishes that were not even dirty. When I hesitated, he grew angry. I remember trying to argue that I was too small, that I could not reach properly, but my words meant nothing. His anger was enough to silence me. That night, he began what would become years of torment. It did not happen in a sudden explosion. It was slow, calculated, like a predator testing its prey. First came the humiliation, the cruel words meant to break my spirit. He told me I was worthless, that even my mother regretted having me. He said I was a mistake, a burden, something that needed to be corrected. I was only a child, and I believed him. Children absorb words like sponges, and when the words come from the person meant to protect you, they cut deeper than any blade. I tried to find comfort in my mother, but she was not the kind of mother who wrapped her arms around me and told me everything would be okay. She lived in shadows, her life built around obedience. When she saw me shaking or noticed the red in my eyes, she said nothing. She pretended not to notice, or worse, she blamed me. In her silence, I learned a terrible truth. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you choose instead to protect themselves. The abuse escalated. It no longer mattered if it was day or night, if people were near or far. He knew how to create excuses to take me aside, how to disguise his cruelty beneath the noise of normal life. Birthdays were the worst. I would hear the chorus of happy birthday, the clapping of hands, the joy of people gathered to celebrate, and at the same time, feel his grip forcing me into silence. The more joy filled the air, the deeper the cruelty became. It was as if he thrived on the contrast, as if breaking me while others laughed made his power greater. I remember sitting in my room afterward, hugging my knees so tightly that my bones hurt, and listening to the party continue outside. My relatives laughed louder, my cousins played, and the smell of food filled the air. To them, it was just another night of joy. To me, it was the night my childhood was stolen. That is how it always was. They saw light while I was drowning in darkness. The first time I truly realized something was wrong was not because of the pain, but because of the silence. Children talk about everything. They talk about bruises, fears, and secrets without filters. But I could not. I carried my silence like armor. I avoided the eyes of adults, too afraid they might see the truth. I stopped laughing at jokes, stopped playing the way I once did. My world grew smaller each day. Even at school, where I once felt free, I became the quiet girl in the back, always avoiding attention. Teachers noticed but dismissed it as shyness. In small towns, people rarely look deeper than the surface. They prefer the illusion of peace. The cruelty of it all is that children still want to believe in love, even when it destroys them. Part of me kept hoping my father would change, that my mother would notice, that someone would step in. That hope kept me alive, even as it betrayed me again and again. Each day I woke up thinking maybe today would be different. Maybe tonight he would not come to my room. Maybe this time someone would hear my silent screams. But no one did. The signs were there though. My clothes often hid bruises, my eyes carried shadows, and my laughter faded into nothing. I learned to make myself invisible because invisibility felt safer than attention. Attention was dangerous. Attention meant being noticed by him. I avoided mirrors, avoided speaking too much, avoided asking questions. I shrank myself into the smallest version possible, hoping I could disappear completely. And yet, even in that shrinking, a small ember of resistance remained. It was the way I clung to my doll, the way I secretly wrote words in the dirt with a stick, words like free and safe, words I barely understood but longed for. It was the way I listened intently to teachers at school, because knowledge felt like a doorway to another life. That ember stayed alive through everything, hidden but never gone. Looking back now, I see that the beginning of the abuse was not just about what he did to me. It was about how he reshaped the world I lived in. He stole the safety of my home, the trust in my family, the innocence of childhood games. But in taking so much, he also revealed something I did not yet understand. He revealed the strength it takes to survive, even when survival feels impossible. That is how the first signs of abuse appeared in my life. Not just in bruises, not just in fear, but in the way my childhood transformed into something unrecognizable. What looked ordinary from the outside hid the most extraordinary cruelty within. And while I could not see it clearly then, Each moment was preparing me for the long and painful path that lay ahead. The cruelty did not remain hidden in subtle looks or whispered commands for long. It grew, like a disease spreading through every corner of my childhood. What had once been rare and confusing moments quickly became routine. The house, which should have been my place of safety, turned into a stage where terror played out night after night. And the most painful part was how ordinary everything seemed on the surface. Guests would arrive, the living room filled with laughter. Neighbors would compliment my parents on how perfect our family looked, and no one could see the truth rotting behind closed doors. The worst moments always happened during gatherings, parties, holidays, birthdays. They were supposed to be joyful events, but to me, they were signals of what was to come. While people raised glasses and clapped their hands in rhythm to a song, I would be pulled into a dark room and silenced. The louder the music played outside, the harsher the silence pressed down on me inside. It was as though he needed the noise of celebration as a shield, hiding his cruelty behind the sounds of happiness. Every cheer from outside felt like a knife twisting deeper into me, because I knew the world was close enough to hear, but chose not to. There are certain details that never leave me, no matter how many decades pass. The smell of alcohol on his breath, sharp and sour. The way his grip left marks that lasted for days. Marks I learned to hide under long sleeves even in the heat of summer. The sound of his laugh when he stepped out of the room afterward, instantly transforming back into the charming man everyone admired. No one questioned why I returned to the party with red eyes or trembling hands. They assumed I was shy, maybe tired. I wanted to scream the truth, but my voice stayed locked inside, buried beneath threats and fear. My mother's silence was its own cruelty. I used to think she truly did not know, but the day came when I realized she saw everything. There were nights when I caught her looking at me with a strange mixture of shame and resentment, as if my suffering were an inconvenience she preferred to ignore. Once I saw her standing in the hallway as he cornered me in the bedroom. Our eyes met for a brief second. Mine begged for help. Hers looked away. That moment cut deeper than any bruise because it confirmed the betrayal. The person who should have protected me had chosen to abandon me. As the abuse escalated, so did the methods of control. It was no longer just about physical pain. He knew how to break me with words. He told me I was nothing, that no one would ever believe me, that if I spoke, he would kill me and my mother. I believed him. At that age, I had no reason not to. He controlled not only my body, but also my mind. He made me feel like an object, a prisoner, something less than human. The world outside went on as normal, but my reality was shrinking into fear, silence, and shame. Even my body became a reminder of my prison. As I grew older and changes came with adolescence, he adapted his cruelty. His threats shifted. His grip grew tighter. His obsession with control only increased. I lived in constant fear of being discovered by others, not because I wanted to keep it hidden, but because I knew if someone did find out, he would make me pay in ways I could not even imagine. So I perfected the art of disguise. At school, I wore smiles that were hollow. I kept my sleeves pulled low, and I avoided friendships that might invite questions. Teachers saw a quiet girl, polite but withdrawn. They never pushed further. In small communities, silence was often mistaken for good behavior. There were nights when I thought my body would simply give up, nights when the pain was too much, when fever burned through me, when I could not breathe from the weight of it all. But somehow, I kept living. I survived, even though I did not understand why. Looking back now, I realized survival itself was a form of defiance. Every breath I took in that house was proof that he had not destroyed me completely. Even though he tried to convince me otherwise, there was still something inside me that refused to die. The world outside remained blind. People praised my father as a hard-working man, admired my mother for her discipline, and told me how fortunate I was to grow up in such a respectable home. If only they had looked closer. If If only they had noticed the way I flinched at sudden movements, or how I avoided sitting too close to anyone. But people rarely look beyond the surface, especially when the surface comforts them. It is easier to believe in the illusion of a perfect family than to confront the truth of abuse. By the time I was 10, I no longer thought of myself as a child. Childhood had been stripped away piece by piece. Instead of dreaming about games or school or what I wanted to be when I grew up, I spent every night strategizing how to survive until morning. I knew exactly which floorboards creaked the loudest, how to stay silent when I wanted to scream, how to keep tears from falling because tears only fueled his cruelty. These were not lessons any child should learn, but they were the only ones I had. And yet, beneath all of it, a small part of me still clung to hope. It was fragile, barely alive, but it existed. Sometimes it came in the form of a kind word from a teacher or a fleeting smile from a stranger that reminded me the world outside my home was not all darkness. That sliver of hope kept me from disappearing completely. It reminded me that maybe, just maybe, life could be different one day. It was in that fragile space between despair and hope that the horror of my childhood continued to unfold. Each day was a repetition of silence. Each night, another battle I never chose to fight. I had become invisible to the world, but inside, a storm was building. And even storms, no matter how long they rage, eventually find a way to break. There is always a moment when silence begins to crack, even if only by accident. For me, that moment came not through courage, but through exhaustion. My body had carried years of pain. My spirit had been pressed into corners too small for hope. And yet something inside me refused to vanish completely. It was during those years of unbearable weight that the first signs of change began to flicker. At school, I had become the quiet girl no one really noticed. I sat at the back of the classroom, never raised my hand, never joined the laughter of the others. Teachers assumed I was shy, classmates labeled me strange, and I let them think it. Blending into the background felt safer than drawing attention. But not everyone was fooled. There was one teacher, a history teacher named Mrs. Thompson, who had eyes that seemed to see deeper than the rest. She was not loud or demanding, but when she looked at me, I felt as though she could read every secret I carried. She began with small questions. "Are you all right today? Do you need help with your homework?" Simple words, but they unsettled me because I was not used to being noticed. One afternoon, when the classroom had emptied and the halls echoed with footsteps heading home, she asked me to stay behind. My heart raced because I thought I had done something wrong. She sat at her desk, hands folded, and looked at me with a softness I had not seen in years. She asked if things were okay at home. Such an ordinary question, but it nearly broke me. For a long time I stayed silent, staring at the floor, afraid that if I opened my mouth everything would spill out. When I finally looked up, my eyes filled with tears I could not stop. I shook my head, but no words came. She did not press me. She simply placed a hand gently on my arm and said, "If you ever need someone to talk to, I will listen." That was the first time in years that I felt someone believed something was wrong. Her words lingered in my mind. At night, when I lay awake, listening for the sound of footsteps in the hall, I remembered her saying she would listen. It felt like a thread I could hold on to in the darkness. I did not trust it yet. The fear was too strong, the threats too real. But the seed was planted. I began to notice that not every adult turned away. Not everyone was blind. Some people could see, and some were willing to hear. It was not only the teacher who noticed. A neighbor once stopped me as I walked home from school. She asked why I always wore long sleeves in the heat, why I looked so tired for someone so young. I mumbled an excuse about the sun, but inside I wondered if she suspected. She gave me an apple from her basket and touched my shoulder in a way that felt kind, not threatening. Small gestures like that mattered more than anyone could understand. They reminded me that there were safe touches in the world, touches that did not hurt or demand. The turning point came quietly, like most important moments do. After another night of silence forced upon me, I went to school, barely able to sit from the pain. Miss Mim Thompson noticed the way I shifted uncomfortably at my desk, how I winced when I tried to stand. At the end of the day, she asked me again to stay. This time her voice carried a firmness that made me believe she already knew. She closed the classroom door, knelt beside me and said softly, "You do not deserve this. Whatever is happening, it is not your fault." Those words were a shock. I had been told the opposite for so long that hearing them felt almost impossible. Not my fault. Could that really be true? I broke that day. The words came out in fragments between sobs, messy and uncontrolled. I told her enough for her to understand the horror I was living in. I did not give every detail. I could not yet, but I gave her the truth that had been locked in my chest for years. She listened without interrupting, without doubting. When I finished, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I believe you." Those 3 words became the foundation of everything that followed. It is difficult to explain the power of being believed after years of silence. Imagine drowning, flailing in water while everyone around you laughs on the shore, pretending they cannot see you. Then imagine someone finally diving in, pulling you up and saying, "I see you, I know you are drowning, and I will not let you sink." That is what it felt like, a rush of air into lungs that had been starved too long. Of course, telling someone did not make the danger disappear instantly. I still had to go home that night. I still had to walk back into the house that smelled of fear and betrayal. But something inside me was different. I was no longer entirely alone. For the first time, I carried with me the knowledge that another person in the world knew the truth. That knowledge gave me a strange kind of courage. Small, fragile, but real. The days that followed were filled with a tension I cannot fully describe. I continued to live my life as if nothing had changed, following the same routines, obeying the same commands. But inside me, a shift had begun. When he looked at me with his eyes full of threat, I thought of Mrs. Thompson's voice, saying it was not my fault. When my mother's gaze turned away, I remembered that someone else had chosen not to look away. The lies that had been drilled into me for years began to lose their grip. This was the first crack in the prison walls, and even the smallest crack is enough to let in light. Once you see that light, you cannot unsee it. You cannot go back to believing there is no way out. It was faint, almost invisible to anyone else, but I felt it. Something was changing. Something was preparing me for the moment when silence would no longer be an option. Freedom did not come to me in one dramatic explosion. It came slowly, like dawn after a night that felt endless. It began with a whisper of hope, then with a small act of courage, and finally with a decision that changed everything. Once the silence was broken in that classroom, once Mrs. Thompson said she believed me, there was no going back. I had lived too long with secrets that poisoned me. Now the truth had been spoken, and the world would never look the same again. What followed was not easy. Speaking out does not erase fear. Each day I returned home, I felt his eyes on me, sharper than ever, as if he sensed something had shifted. My mother grew colder, more distant, as though I had betrayed her by allowing the truth to leak out. I carried that guilt for years, not realizing that silence was never my responsibility. Still, despite the fear, the thread of hope grew stronger. The more I heard the words, "It is not your fault," echoing in my memory, the more I began to believe them. It was a neighbor who finally helped seal the path toward my escape. She had seen enough, sensed enough to know something was wrong. One afternoon, she invited me into her kitchen under the pretense of giving me cookies. She lowered her voice and asked, "Do you want to be safe?" My body froze, because no one had ever put it that simply before. Safe. The word itself felt like a prayer. I nodded, tears blurring my vision. She squeezed my hand and promised she would help. The plan was fragile, built on trust and timing. I was terrified every second of it, afraid he would discover and destroy me before I could slip away. But the human spirit, even when broken, clings to the promise of freedom. I clung to it like a lifeline. When the moment came, it was not cinematic. It was a quiet morning, the sun just rising when I walked out of that house with nothing but the clothes on my back. My heart pounded so loudly I thought the neighbors might hear it. I did not look back. If I had, I might have lost the courage to keep moving. What happened afterward was messy, complicated, filled with both relief and grief. Authorities became involved. My father's mask of respectability cracked. Though there were still people who refused to believe the truth, my mother never forgave me, choosing her silence over her daughter. That loss cut deeply, but by then I understood that some people would rather live blind than face the reality of pain. I could no longer carry her denial. I had my own survival to protect. Building a life after such destruction is not simple. The scars do not disappear. They live in the body, in the way you flinch at sudden noises, in the way laughter can still sound threatening, in the way you wake up from dreams that feel too real. But scars are not just reminders of pain. They are proof that healing is possible. Every scar on me told the story, not of what was done to me, but of what I overcame. Over the years, I learned to reclaim pieces of myself. I found work, first humble and small, then steady and sustaining. I found kindness in unexpected places. People who showed me that not every touch brings harm. Not every smile hides cruelty. I learned to bake, and with every loaf of bread, every cake, I rewrote the memories that once haunted me. Where birthdays had once meant silence and fear, I turned them into moments of sweetness for others. In giving joy, I found my own. The most powerful change, however, was within myself. I stopped seeing the girl in the mirror as broken. I began to see her as a survivor, a fighter, someone who endured the unendurable and still found a way to stand. I realized that my story, as painful as it was, could carry meaning, that by sharing it, I could reach others who still live in silence, and that became my purpose. Now, at 72, when I stand at the fair with flour on my hands and children running up to my stall, I feel something I once thought was impossible. Peace. The laughter that once tormented me has become healing. The sound of people clapping no longer reminds me of cruelty, but of celebration. It took a lifetime, but I finally reclaimed the sounds, the smells, the moments that were stolen from me. If you are listening to my story right now, I want you to carry this with you. Pain does not define you. Silence does not protect you. And survival, no matter how fragile, is proof of your strength. You may feel broken, but even broken things can shine. I am living proof of that. Thank you for giving me your time, for walking with me through memories that were heavy but necessary. If my story touched you, if it gave you even a spark of hope, I ask you to stay with us. There are many more voices, many more survivors whose stories deserve to be heard. On the screen now, there is another video waiting for you. Another journey, another soul who found light after darkness. Click it, listen, and let their strength remind you once again that none of us are ever truly alone. And before you go, remember this. I was once the girl who died in silence while others laughed in the next room. But today, I am the woman who tells her story, so no other child has to stay quiet. That is the power of survival. That is the power of truth.